Here he is, the former KGO pundit, talk show host, sexiest man alive.
Yeah.
John Rothmann, everybody. John, it's great seeing you always.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. So we've got a lot to talk about, and I want to start with the Fed because it's so weird that so much has happened since our last conversation.
Yes.
Because we were talking about all the different things that were affecting the economy and inflation and all the rest, and you were identifying Fed policy as something that, was critical to all of this in the economy. And you were sort of speaking in a confident way about what the Fed was doing. And I'm not saying you're even wrong about this. I'm just saying that now that you have these ripple effects from Fed policy, I'm talking about raising interest rates, and then we know what happened. These huge quantities of money were parked in long-term T-bills, which no longer maintain that asset value. And that's what really sunk SVB, in addition to the run. I mean, let's be honest, John, there was more going on at SVB than just the asset value, right? It was a run on that bank that was probably tech bro VC prompted. But I'm wondering how you see Fed policy now, and as you look at the American economic system and how jittery everything is, the banking system, what your posture is toward everything going on.
I have faith in the economy. I have to, because if the economy goes belly up, so do we all. And I know people who are deeply affected by this tragedy in the bank in Silicon Valley. And of course, Swiss Bank, we're listening to today. The big bank here that's affected is First Republic, but they seem to be okay because everything's being covered. And I think that's the key. The Federal Reserve, whatever you think of the Federal Reserve, is now covering these losses. And I think that is what is critical. It shows the value of the Fed. There cannot be, at least the Fed says there cannot be, the kind of run that there was in 2008, that there are too many protections now. And may I say, as one who does have investments and who does follow this carefully, this is a critical place for America and the world. Remember, what happens to us has ripple effects across the planet, as we're seeing this morning. So we'll have to see how it all plays out.
Does it trouble you, John, though, that we've seen so much in the way of regulations, protections? I'm glad you used that word. Protections. We've seen so much of it rolled back. It even predated the Trump administration. The Glass-Steagall, the Trump rollbacks on basic protections when it comes to banks. Banks have been deregulated now after the re-regulation following the '08 crash. They've been re-regulated and now deregulated. They've unwound a lot of those regulations. Does that disturb you?
Yes. Banks should do banking. Stocks should be a separate issue altogether. The whole question of mortgages and real estate, that's what I really worry about, is if there were a real collapse in the real estate market, we would be up the creek without a paddle. So these are all issues which the presidential campaign, a year away, essentially, are going to have to deal with. And we are going to have to deal with it every day in terms of what we do. My real advice is, if you are not personally affected at this point, don't panic. Hold on to what you've got. Sit tight, because things bounce around. Look at where First Republic went 2 days ago, then where it went yesterday, and look where it is today. So you just never know. The one thing I know I can count on is the Mark madness. And it seems to me, Mark, that this madness is being generated by you.
It's funny. I was talking to Albert last night, and I said, well, because we're going to send the brackets to various people like Spencer Christian, and Dan Ashley is going to get one, and we're sending them to Brett Burkhart's going to get one, these kinds of people, who we know in the Bay Area from media, et cetera. And I said, we should send one to John Rothmann. I don't know whether he's going to get into it, or he doesn't have to get into it, but whether he'll fill it out or whatever. And so we are sending you one, and you just have to indicate by hand. We're sending you a PDF, and you can play it like anybody else. You don't need to know anything. So that's you don't need to have.
I've been in this business long enough to know I don't need to know anything. Thank you very much.
But you don't have any granular knowledge of the show. You yourself can be part of the madness, I guess is my point. All right, well, it's against the backdrop of a jittery economy then, John, that we have conversations about other things concerning politics. I know you gravitate toward politics, both locally and also nationally. I'm wondering what stands out to you in the latest week since we spoke last.
Mike Pence, his talk at the Gridiron dinner, which is normally confidential, by the way, was very clear. He is separating himself from Donald Trump. He is saying history will judge Donald Trump. But I would point out to you, we are going to be judging him ourselves. Let me point out that the odds are that Donald Trump will be indicted, either by one grand jury or another. And the question has been asked of me by a number of people, is it possible to indict a former president? The answer is yes. Richard Nixon accepted a pardon in 1974 in order to avoid indictment, certain indictment, and conviction. Bill Clinton, 2 days before he left the presidency, agreed to admit that he'd obstructed justice and had committed perjury in order to avoid certain indictment the minute he left office. We have a precedent in terms of our executive branch. Aaron Burr was indicted for treason. Now, this goes back to 1805, 1806, but John Marshall, the Chief Justice, presided, and Burr was found not guilty. And of course, Spiro Agnew, who said he would not resign if he were indicted. And it didn't come to that because there was a plea deal. He pled nolo contendere, and so he avoided indictment, although he had to admit his guilt. My suggestion to you is, in the next few weeks, we are going to see increasing assurances of Donald Trump's indictment on a variety of charges. One other quick point. The book I recommend to everybody to read these days is the January 6th report. You don't have to read the whole 800 pages. You can just read the summary, which is about 180 pages. You can read it. You'll understand that what happened on January 6th was absolutely seditious. And there's no doubt about his guilt. The question is whether the political forces in the Justice Department, and I say that advisedly, political forces in the Justice Department are willing to pursue it.
Well,
that's it. The other big story, of course, is the downing of the drone and the conflict now between the United States and Russia over this question, with increasing tensions and escalation. And one other quick point I would just throw in: Ron DeSantis, I think, had his George Romney moment. Remember when George Romney talked about being brainwashed in Vietnam back in 1967? Well, Ron DeSantis yesterday essentially kissed off Ukraine and the struggle for freedom there. And I think it has done him incalculable damage. We have now, I believe, more than a dozen Republican senators who are saying they don't agree with DeSantis. That is not good news for him. On the other hand, it would appear that no one is holding Donald Trump accountable for anything in the Republican Party. So who knows what that will all mean.
Well, Trump lines up with DeSantis in that way, doesn't he? Where is he on Ukraine? I thought he is also kind of stepping back from support of Ukraine.
No, what he has said is even more interesting to me. If I were president, said Donald Trump,
this wouldn't have happened, right?
We would not be doing all of this. And if you put me back in the White House, it'll all be okay. That is his line. I don't believe it's true, and I don't think people are going to buy it. But it means that within the Republican Party now, there really are the wings being formed, and one of those critical battlegrounds will be Ukraine. People like Lindsey Graham and others who are the leaders of the Republican Party in the Senate are being very clear about that. One other quick thing was Mitch McConnell's fall. He is now evidently not doing very well. He is in the hospital. There is real concern because the Senate is so narrowly divided. And Mitch McConnell is the leader of the Republican Party. If he can't function, what do the Republicans do? And if there is a vacancy, what happens there? I mean, there's so many variables in the days ahead. It's really quite remarkable. And Joe Biden has a big problem. We shouldn't ignore that. His approval for drilling in Alaska has infuriated the environmentalists who have backed him 100%. I frankly don't understand the logic of Joe Biden on that, because that's part of his base constituency. And the idea of drilling in pristine areas of Alaska, if Donald Trump had done it, the whole world would have been up in arms. And so this is another thing that Joe Biden is going to have to wrestle with.
I'm glad you mentioned this, John. Can we just stop on this for a moment? Because the reality is that this was I think you correctly identify it as a super controversial decision to okay this Conoco project in Alaska. And it's also something that runs against his brand, Biden's brand, which is sort of the forward-thinking, environmental, green-oriented presidency, even as we understand that he is, having to take care of the fossil fuel industry. But what I'm seeing now, and because I came in up very heavily against it on this show, and I did a couple of different little rants about it, because it really does make my blood boil. Obviously, politically, and this is what is such a strength of yours, he needs to take care of Alaska, right? Murkowski was after this for a long time. There are a lot of lobbies around both employment in Alaska and money coming into Alaska, and the fossil fuel lobby, of course, is immense. So he had all of that pressure. But here's the additional element that I didn't mention the last couple of days. This did start under Trump. There was a provisional contract actually issued for this project, and it was done, apparently, the calculation, both politically and legally within the Biden administration. They sort of did the legal arithmetic and saw that, wow, if we essentially invalidate or back away or don't allow this project to continue, we could be in court for a long time. It'll cost taxpayers a bunch of money, and they may end up with a bigger footprint from a drilling standpoint than they started with, than was originally approved. Now, before I let you speak, and I'm sorry to run on, I want to say, so what? Go to court and take them on. Are you a green president and a green administration or not? So that's where I am on this thing. And I see now John Rothmann, now I may have lost my connection to John, but the fact is that isn't incidental information. It's important information. I believe it went into the calculations around it. And Deb Haaland, who's the Interior Secretary, I have a lot of respect for her because she is a Native American, and I think Native Americans have such a great stake in what's going on native lands and in lands of this country and lands that they occupied originally, right? She wouldn't even have her name on the approval of this project. So we know that within his administration, the Biden administration, there was pushback on this project. And it went forward for some of the reasons that I've identified. Kim, I know you actually pushed me some of the interesting details around this that did sort of mitigate a lot of the original angry pushback that I had offered on this show on Monday.
Well, it makes you understand why the Biden administration felt cornered. Like, if we fight them, it's going to cost billions of dollars. They're going to win anyway, and they're going to drill anyway, right? So at least if we do it this way, we'll be able to constrain the amount of drilling, put some more regulations on it, slap some more environmental stuff that they have to adhere to on it, and we'll save the taxpayers a bunch of money in a case that we weren't going to win because ConocoPhillips already held these leases.
Right.
So I understand why they're doing it. It just doesn't feel very good to me.
Yeah. And so what I say is BS. You fight them in court. If you stand on your principles, stand on them, make them go to court. Because as I told you yesterday, the industry, ConocoPhillips, is now walking around going, we don't like these environmental regulations either on the way that we're going to drill. And they're not quietly going away and, counting their money. No, they're walking in like a bunch of fat cats and saying no. And we don't like those environmental regulations either. So I say take them on in court. This idea somehow, well, it's going to cost the taxpayers money. Please. All of a sudden you care about the taxpayers' money? It's the best spending of my money you can do to prevent oil drilling in pristine Alaskan land. And the last thing I'll say, and I've said it before, and you've got to know it, is don't spoon feed me the BS about how this oil will help reduce the price of gasoline in America and make us more domestically independent. We are domestically independent.
Yeah.
It will go on to the spot market worldwide. That's where that oil is going. And will the American taxpayer, this taxpayer that you care so much about, will they receive any benefits? No. ConocoPhillips will receive benefits. Private industry will receive benefits. And they'll get the benefits of our tax breaks too. It's outrageous. I would take them to court. But I do appreciate the details associated with this problematic environmental issue that the Biden administration had to deal with. And I think it's a fair position that Kim is mentioning, which is, hey, we were worried that if they took us to court, it would take a long time and we might end up losing. They'd have an even bigger footprint than they had for oil drilling than they were going to have originally.
Yeah.
So
somehow we lost John Rothman, so I don't know what happened with that.
I'm worried about a power. It's possible there could have been a power outage where he is.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Or maybe you just finally,
I went on too long.
He was like, listen, if he's going to go on and on, I don't even know why I'm here. I'm out.
Hey, I could say that about him. He goes on and on. I love when he goes on and on. That's the best part about Rothman is that he goes on and on.
Why are you yelling?
Yeah.
So why can't I go on and on once in a while?
Why are you yelling?
All right. Thank you, John Rothman. I'm sorry that we lost you.
It was great. I loved it.
I don't know
We always love
why.
to have John Rothman on the show. It's fun.
We do love John Rothman.
Yeah.
So smash the like button for John Rothman.
Smash it with your iron rod.
If we get enough likes, we can bring John Rothman back. Please, everyone. Smash the
Everyone
like
click
button
the like
like a
button.
boss.
Smash it
Right
with
now.
your iron rod.
Let's bring John Rothman back.
You know, they do this to me all the time. I don't know what the hell they do it for.
All right. Well, I'm saddened that we've lost John Rothman, but it's a good. He's watching Fox News, says Spencer. Chris says you can't make steel with solar panels and wind power.
Yeah, that's a non
I
sequitur.
don't know
Sorry
what
about that.
means, Chris, but I mean, if you're saying that we need to have domestic fossil fuel development, you don't think we have enough of it? You don't think we frack enough? You don't think we so, I mean, if you're suggesting that pontificating is a ding word, that is true.
Yeah.
If you're suggesting that we should have the domestic steel industry, you can try to rebuild the domestic steel industry. As you know, a lot of the domestic steel industry is overseas. I don't know, like I try to take comments and try to dignify them with an answer, but I mean, you know, even the tariffs associated with Chinese steel, those tariffs weren't enough to keep, in some way, reinvigorate the American steel industry. Sadly, I mean, we're a global economy now. So we're going to get off fossil fuels someday. If we're forced to do it, it will be a lot more expensive than if we do it willingly. Okay. We're not forced to do it, Eric. I mean, you need a strategy of getting off of fossil fuels. So what's the plan for someday getting off of them? I mean, how do you envision it? When you say we'll get off them someday, what do you mean? When we run out of them? We'll never run out of them. Okay. There are always new ways. Fracking was the big technological breakthrough in terms of energy, right? That you could somehow break apart chemically the oil and energy that was under the ground. It used to be, as you know, you stick a pipe in the ground and you pump out oil. That's not what fracking is anymore. There's a limitless amount of energy in some way, I would say limitless. You're going to run out of a lot of other stuff before you run out of oil, or energy might be another way to put it. So I don't know what that means. We're going to run out of it. That is with all respect, I just think I need to know more, to be fair to you. So we want John back, but I don't know what happened to him. So, what can I tell you? I do have an update, and I want to update a couple of cases in Law and Disorder. I also want to update I have Trump and Oprah Winfrey news. Can I give you that now, or do you want to wait?
I'll take it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's pretty unreal. I mean, Trump is trumping along.
There's never been anything like this.
And one of the things he's doing is he's talking about these various letters that he received. I guess he's come out with a new book. Is that what Trump has done? And
Yes.
in the new book,
Yes.
he is let me put my credibility glasses on and I can tell you.
In the advertisement for the new book, he's coming out and saying all of these people, and we're talking like Queen Elizabeth and former presidents and Princess Diana, he said they all kissed my ass.
Right. That's exactly it. They all kissed my ass.
He's so vulgar.
Well, I mean, if you're going to say it, You got to say it.
What?
You know. His son, Don Jr., don't you miss the rogues
No.
gallery that was the Trump administration? Don Jr., you had Eric, you had, there he is.
We
Rothman's
got
back.
him.
You had Kushner, you had Ivanka, you had Bill Barr, you had Sean Hannity. They were all part of the Trump administration. Don't you miss that, John? Don't you miss those guys? Come on.
I apologize. We had a computer failure, so I had to shift computers. I apologize for that.
No problem.
You're asking about the right-wing talk show hosts who are culpable on so many levels for the disaster which we confront. And the answer is there's no accountability. It goes to show you the question of cable and the question of accountability versus when we had regulated networks. And that's a whole other issue. But I'm sorry I was going.
Don't you miss that administration, though, John, with lobbyists who had sued the EPA, actually running the EPA? Don't you miss those interior secretaries that were convicted, or I should say they were you're alleged to have been involved in serious corruption to the point that they had to resign? I think they went to two of them, through two of them.
You're right.
Wilbur
100%.
Ross, the Commerce Secretary, who never divested himself of all that money, even though he said he did, of all those holdings. Yeah.
And there's no accountability. But let me point out to you, that had to do with unfortunate Republicans in control of Congress.
And there may not be accountability for much of anything. It's interesting. You talked earlier, John Rothmann, you had kind of led with when we were talking about accountability, that there are charges likely being brought against Donald Trump. You do think that there'll be an indictment issued. I wonder if you think that a conviction is possible and what might happen. And
well, the point is, I want him in court, I want him convicted, and then I would expect the president to grant clemency. Clemency is not a pardon. It simply means the president wouldn't go to jail. That would be my prediction. And that would be a courtesy extended to any former president of the United States.
He would still be eligible to become president of the United States, would he not?
No, not if he's convicted. Not if he's convicted.
Was it a felony? It's a felony. He's being
yes. The indictment is a felony indictment.
Okay.
But frankly, Mark, although I hate to make my predictions because I've been wrong so often, that I don't see Trump being the nominee. But as I was saying, I think before we were disrupted there, DeSantis' statement about what's going on in Ukraine is a terrible blow to his candidacy. A lot of people are going to stop and think and say, wait a minute, is this a guy you want in the Oval Office? Richard Nixon once told me that 70% of a president's time is devoted to foreign policy. I think that's absolutely correct. And if you don't have somebody who has some capability, you've got a problem. We've got a problem, not you. We would have a problem.
I'll give John Rothmann a ding for Richard Nixon told me once. I think that's pretty strong.
You really think that if the former President Trump was convicted and Biden was in office, that Biden would pardon him so he wouldn't have to go to
pardon
prison?
him, give him clemency.
No,
give him clemency? No. He has to go to jail. Jail, like full-on jail with an orange jumpsuit and a big, ugly, nasty, dirty toilet in a little cell.
You are
bad things happening.
You are conveying your political biases, which are perfectly permissible.
Well, her bias is toward decency. It's not even political. It's, my God, it's toward the rule of law. The guy was I don't think.
I'm asked for my prediction. That is how Joe Biden finesses the problem.
I don't think you can do that. When you have a former president, if he is convicted of charges of stirring up a riot or an insurrection against the United States government, to give that person clemency?
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you one bit. But I'm not being asked what I think. I'm being asked what I think about the possibility of a former president going to jail. Look, no former president deserved prison more than my old boss, Richard Nixon. Nobody. And yet there was a decision made. And let me remind you, Gerald Ford pardoned him. He had to admit his culpability, but Gerald Ford pardoned him. And I would remind you that Gerald Ford in I believe it was in 2001, received the Profiles in Courage Award from the John F. Kennedy Library because everybody understood that putting a former president in jail isn't the key. The key is that history has to be the judge. That's why what Mike Pence said at the Gridiron Dinner was so important.
Well,
he said history will judge.
Let's compare the crimes. because you had Nixon with Watergate. He stole some stuff, and yes, it was so he could, affect an election.
But he paid
right?
off, but it paid off cover-up money, and it was on tape of him actually.
Right. But then fast
engineering the
forward
payout.
to Trump, and he's trying to steal an election, create confusion and chaos so that he can sweep in and he can stay in power. Goes against every American principle.
Let me remind you that Richard Nixon and Bob Haldeman, in the June 23rd discussion, attempted to involve the FBI and the CIA in a cover-up.
Right.
Believe me, there is no more heinous crime that could have been committed in the Oval Office than that. And you're correct. It is analogous, and I want to say this very clearly. I just read the entire January.
Yes, ding is.
I just read the entire January 6th report. I deserve a ding for that, I'm telling you. But people,
you do. How many pages is that again? The January 6th
800
report?
pages.
800.
But people should understand that the January 6th report rather, is so devastating in terms of Donald Trump and his role. So it's apples and oranges. What Richard Nixon did was wrong. What Donald Trump did was wrong. They both had to pay a price. Nixon never went to jail, and I don't think Trump will either. Clemency is not a pardon. Let's be clear on that.
John had this to say about the January 6th report. He said, I loved it, but changed the ending, is what he said, which was really kind of an odd take on. I'm going to ask you one thing kind of off point, but on point. You're a voracious reader, and I think you must read at a speed that I'm envious of. I'm a slow reader. It's hard for 800 pages. That could take me all year to read. So I'm in and out of books constantly. My question is, how quickly do you read?
Very quickly.
Yeah.
I have always had that ability. I remember I wrote a report when I was in junior high school on the rise and fall of the Confederate government by Jefferson Davis. It's a 2-volume massive tome, and I read the whole darn thing, and I wrote the book report. And the teacher called me in, Mrs. McDonald. She called me in, and she said, "You didn't really read this, did you?" I said, "Of course I did. Open to a page, ask me a question." That's exactly what she did. I answered the question, and I got my A.
Wow.
There's never been anything like this.
That is pretty amazing. That is pretty amazing, pal.
No, I was lucky that she opened to a page that I remembered.
He's a sexy fool. Joins us on Wednesdays. We're out of time. I love you, John. You're the greatest.
I'm sorry about the interruption.
Oh, don't worry, man. It's so much fun to talk to you.
Just remember, I worked for Richard Nixon. There was an 18-and-a-half-minute gap. I did not equal the 18-and-a-half-minute gap for you, but I apologize for that. And I look forward to next week, if not sooner.
Good stuff. John Rothmann, everybody. Thanks, John. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.